We're starting section 2 of chapter 9, which is the statistical mean. So please write down these notes in your notebook. If you have a question, write them down on the side and we can go over those later. If you need to rewind the video to hear something again, please do so. When you're ready, you can move on. Please do not try to fast forward. You will miss some content that we're going over. So again, 9.2, statistical mean. So what is a mean? The mean is the average of all of our data points. And how do we calculate the mean? So the mean is the sum of all the data divided by the number of data points. So again, write that down and I'll give you examples to show you how to use that. So here's my example. If I have the numbers 8, 5, 6, and 9, to find the mean, I first get the sum of all the data points. I divide by the number of data points. I had 4 data points. So if I added up the top, that was 28 divided by 4, so my mean is 7. And then I always make sure that that number, the average, the mean, falls within all of your numbers. So if your lowest number is a 5 and your biggest number is a 9, make sure that number 7 falls in between there, which it does. If it doesn't, you've calculated it incorrectly and you need to recalculate. Here's another example to show us how to calculate the mean. So you're writing this down. So we want to find the mean of this data set. Okay, so here are my numbers. So write those down. And our formula to calculate the mean, so we first want to add them all up. So if I total all the numbers, it equals 264. And we're going to use calculators for this section. So either have a calculator, use your computer. If you don't have a calculator, I'll have them in class for you. Then we count up how many numbers we have. We have 6 numbers. So 264 divided by 6. The mean is, or the average is, 44. And again, look at your data set. So my lowest number is a 15, and my highest number is an 81. And that 44 does fall in the middle of all of those numbers. So again, double check to make sure your number fits with the data that you've collected. Okay, you might want to copy this down, so you might want to pause the video first. So we're going to compare the means. The data shows the monthly rainfall in 2 cities. So we have City A, and then we have City B. Here's City B. Okay, so let's look at the average rainfall in City A first. If I add up all my numbers, I divide by how many I have, you get an average of 3.1. So here's my total, just if you want to double check. This is the total of all my numbers, and I had 5 numbers. So let's look at City B. So here's my total. So there's my total divided by how many numbers. I only have 4 numbers, but that's okay because I'm taking an average. And here's my average rainfall in City B. So which city has a higher rainfall? Well, City B does because its rainfall on average is 3.7 and probably inches. So it doesn't matter how many data points you have, as long as you find the average, you can then compare averages. Okay, now you're going to do some on your own. So number 1, find the mean. So remember what you need to do. If you need to look back at the notes, go ahead and look back at the notes. Please write down all of your calculations in your notebook. Even if you used a calculator, write down what your total was. Write down how many data points you have, so that if your mean is incorrect, we can figure out what went wrong. When you're ready, and put your answer in the text box on the right. Here's another one for you to try. So there are fewer numbers, but these have decimals, so don't forget about our decimals. So use the same technique. Please write this down in your notebook so that we can see if you have the incorrect answer, what you did wrong. Okay, so now we're going to look at something called outliers. Sorry about that. The screen just does that one. I have to get rid of that. So what's an outlier? So an outlier is a number much greater or less than the other values. And later on in another section, We'll show you how you could actually calculate that, but for now we're just going to look at numbers that are far out on the upper end or the lower end from the numbers that we have. So if we have these numbers, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 6, and then we have the number 12. Well, the 12 is the outlier. It doesn't really fit with the pattern that we see. Okay, so write this down, and again we're going to go over some examples. So sometimes those outliers really throw off your mean or your average. So we're going to see what happens when you use the outlier and when you don't use the outlier. So here we have some weight of kittens. So we want to get the average or the mean of those, but it's really hard to see where the outlier is. So if you look, you can also organize your data and put it from least to greatest. So here's your outlier. So now we're going to recalculate without and with our. So again, remember to find the mean. I added up all of my numbers and divided by how many, in this case, kittens I had. So the mean with the outlier is 5.2. And the mean without the outlier is 4.97. So how did that outlier affect our results? So the mean with the outlier is much greater because the outlier is a greater number. So if we look at our average, here are two averages. This outlier makes it appear that the weight of the kittens is actually greater than it really should be. So sometimes outliers skew or offset the average where it really should be. So here's another example 3B with test scores. So here are the test scores. And you can see the 30 is the outlier. So here's our mean with the outlier. Here's our mean without the outlier. So which score do you think is more accurate? That 30 seems to have kind of thrown off our average. So I would say the mean without the outlier is much more accurate to show what students could do. So sometimes you might just throw out that data point, not the student's score, of course. Okay, so now you have one on your own. So you're going to first find the outlier, and then you're going to calculate the mean with and without the outlier. So you might want to, after you write this down, write down what you're supposed to do. So sometimes that might even be a good thing to do on a quiz or a test. So we first want to find the outlier, and then I want to calculate the mean with and without the outlier. So here I have some weight of dogs. Here I want to find out what's the outlier and all those data points. Then calculate the mean with the outlier and without the outlier. Remember, just write down your numbers so that we can see what's happening if we have a mistake. Here's another example. So calculate on your own. You're going to find the outlier, and then you're going to calculate the mean and the with and without the outlier. So this is just pretend. Here are some flight prices to Hawaii. So what is the outlier? What is the cost with the outlier, and what is the cost without the outlier? So again, when you have that answer, put your answer in the text box on the right. Okay, last slide. So in the text box, you're going to tell me what is the mean. How do I calculate the mean? So notice questions 1 and 2 are different. What is an outlier, and how do outliers affect the mean? When you're done, answer that, put it in the text box on the right, and we're going to start some practice problems.